The desert sun beat down on the cracked asphalt as the military transport truck rolled into the parking lot of Mike's Diner, a popular truck stop just outside Bakersfield. The vehicle stood out like a sore thumb among the rows of 18-wheelers and motorcycles parked in neat lines. Its olive green paint job and official military markings drew curious glances from truckers, grabbing their afternoon coffee, and bikers, taking a break from the long desert highway. Behind the wheel sat Lieutenant Amy Chen, a 29-year-old Army K-9 handler with 5 years of experience under her belt. Her black hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and despite the long drive from Colorado, her uniform remained sharp and professional. She had been on the road for 8 hours, transporting 2 very special passengers to a training facility in San Diego. This wasn't her first cross-country transport mission, but something about today felt different. In the back of the specially modified truck, 2 German shepherds waited patiently in their climate-controlled compartments. Max, a 4-year-old male with a coat like burnt copper, had served 2 tours overseas detecting explosives. His keen nose had saved countless lives in Afghanistan, sniffing out roadside bombs before they could harm American soldiers. Beside him, Bella, a 3-year-old female with intelligent brown eyes, specialized in tracking and patrol work. Together, they represented years of intensive training and hundreds of thousands of dollars in military investment. Amy parked the truck away from the main crowd, choosing a spot where she could keep an eye on her vehicle while grabbing a quick meal. The dogs needed their rest and she needed caffeine. The GPS showed they still had 4 hours of driving ahead, and she wanted to make sure everyone was ready for the final stretch. As she stepped out of the truck, Amy noticed a group of about 8 bikers gathered near the diner entrance. They sat on their chrome-heavy motorcycles, leather jackets gleaming in the afternoon sun, talking and laughing among themselves. Their leader appeared to be a stocky man in his 50s with a gray beard and arms covered in tattoos. He wore a black leather vest with various patches, including one that read, Road Kings MC. The moment Amy's boots hit the pavement, the conversation among the bikers shifted. She could feel their eyes on her as she walked around to check on her dogs through the small observation windows. Max lifted his head when he saw her, his tail giving a slight wag. Bella remained alert but calm, her training evident in her composed demeanor. "You boys seeing what I'm seeing?" the bearded man called out to his friends, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "Looks like the Army's sending little girls to do a man's job now." His comment drew chuckles from the group. Amy had heard similar remarks before during her military career. Being a woman in a male-dominated field came with its challenges, but she had learned to focus on her work rather than the opinions of strangers. She opened the truck's side panel to check the water levels in the dogs' compartments. Both animals had plenty of fresh water and were comfortable in their air-conditioned space. The transport vehicle was specially designed for long-distance travel with military working dogs, complete with proper ventilation, temperature control, and emergency medical supplies. "Hey there, soldier girl," another biker called out, this one younger with a shaved head and multiple piercings. "You sure you can handle whatever's in that truck? Sounds like you got some big dogs back there." Amy ignored the comment and continued her routine check. She examined the security locks, tested the communication system that allowed her to monitor the dog's vital signs, and made sure the emergency equipment was properly secured. Every detail mattered when transporting military assets worth more than most people's houses. The bikers' conversation grew louder as more of them joined in the commentary. They seemed to find great entertainment in the sight of a young woman in military uniform handling what they assumed were just regular dogs. If only they knew what Max and Bella were really capable of. "I bet those are just some fancy lap dogs," laughed a third biker, this one wearing a bandana around his neck. "Probably cost the taxpayers a fortune to train them to sit and roll over." Amy finished her inspection and locked the truck. She had protocols to follow, and getting into arguments with civilians wasn't part of them. The dogs were secure, comfortable, and ready for the next leg of their journey. All she needed was a quick meal and some coffee. Then they could be back, on the road. As she walked toward the diner entrance, she had to pass near the group of bikers. Their leader, who seemed to go by the nickname Tank based on what his friends were calling him, stood up from his motorcycle. He was a big man, probably 6 feet tall and weighing at least 250 pounds, with the kind of presence that usually intimidated people. "Excuse me, miss," Tank said, his tone dripping with false politeness. "I couldn't help but notice you're traveling with some dogs. My buddies and I here, we've been around animals our whole lives. If you need any help handling them, we'd be happy to lend a hand." Amy stopped and looked at him directly. "Thank you for the offer, but I'm fine. These are military working dogs, and I'm their assigned handler." This statement caused an even bigger round of laughter from the group. Tank's grin widened as he looked back at his friends, clearly enjoying the attention. "Military working dogs, huh?" he said, emphasizing each word like it was a joke. "And what exactly do these military dogs do? Fetch newspapers, guard the mess hall?" "They're trained for explosive detection, patrol work, and protection," Amy replied calmly. "They've both served overseas in combat zones." "Combat zones?" Tanky repeated, his voice full of mock amazement. "You mean to tell me that the army is sending puppies to fight wars now? And they put a little thing like you in charge of them?" The other bikers erupted in laughter again. Amy could see that several other people in the parking lot were starting to pay attention to the scene. A few truckers had stopped to watch, and some families with children were giving the group a wide berth as they headed into the diner. Amy took a deep breath and reminded herself of her training. She was representing the United States Army, and her conduct reflected on the entire military. Getting into a shouting match with a group of bikers wouldn't help anyone, least of all Max and Bella, who were counting on her to get them safely to their destination. "I need to get some food and be back on the road," she said politely. "Excuse me." She tried to walk past Tank, but he casually stepped sideways, blocking her path to the diner door. It wasn't aggressive enough to be threatening, but it was clear he wasn't done with his entertainment. "Now hold on there, soldier girl," Tank said, his friends gathering closer behind him. "We're just trying to be friendly. Maybe you could show us these famous military dogs of yours. I bet they're real impressive." Amy could see this situation was heading in a direction she didn't want to go. The dogs in the truck were highly trained military assets, not circus animals, to be shown off for entertainment. But she also knew that sometimes the best way to handle skeptics was to educate them. The question was whether these particular skeptics were interested in learning or just looking for trouble. The desert wind picked up, blowing dust across the parking lot as Amy stood facing Tank and his crew. Behind her, the truck containing two of the military's finest working dogs sat quietly in the afternoon heat. In a few minutes everything would change, but for now, Amy had a decision to make about how to handle this unexpected confrontation. Amy looked at Tank for a moment, weighing her options. She could try to push past him, but that might escalate things unnecessarily. She could call for backup, but the nearest military base was hours away. Or she could try to defuse the situation, with patience and professionalism, the way her instructors had taught her during conflict resolution training. "Listen," she said, keeping her voice calm and steady. "I appreciate your interest, but these dogs are not pets. They're working animals, with specific protocols. I can't just show them off to strangers." Tank's expression shifted slightly, his friendly facade beginning to crack. "Protocols?" he repeated, drawing out the word mockingly. "Sounds like a fancy way of saying you don't actually know how to handle them." His friends chuckled and moved closer, forming a loose semicircle around Amy. She noticed that other people in the parking lot were starting to give them a wider berth. A family with young children quickly loaded their car and drove away, and a couple of truckers who had been walking toward the diner changed direction. "Look, I just want to get some food and continue my mission," Amy said, trying once more to step around Tank. "Please let me pass." But Tank wasn't finished with his show. He turned to his buddies with an exaggerated shrug. "Did you hear that, boys? She's got a mission. Probably delivering some poodles to a dog show somewhere." The laughter from his crew grew louder. Amy could see they were feeding off each other's energy, and Tank was clearly enjoying being the center of attention. This was exactly the kind of situation her training had prepared her for, but it was still uncomfortable being outnumbered and far from any military support. "I bet those dogs are scared of their own shadows," said the biker with the shaved head. Probably hide behind her skirt when they hear loud noises. Military dogs, Tank said, shaking his head with fake sympathy. What's next? Military cats? Military hamsters? The army must be really desperate if they're recruiting pets now, Amy felt her jaw tighten, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had dealt with skepticism before, but there was something particularly irritating about their complete dismissal of military working dogs. Max and Bella had risked their lives overseas, had saved countless soldiers from hidden explosives, and deserved better than to be mocked by people who had never served a day in their lives. These dogs have served in Afghanistan, she said quietly. They've saved human lives. Oh, really? Tank's voice dripped with sarcasm. And what did they do over there? Sniff out the enemy's lunch? Bark at suspicious shadows? More laughter erupted from the group. The biker with the bandana slapped his knee dramatically. I bet they had little army helmets too, maybe tiny combat boots. Amy took a deep breath and tried a different approach. Look, I understand you might not be familiar with military working dogs, but they undergo months of intensive training. They can detect explosives from distances that would amaze you, track people across miles of terrain, and protect soldiers in combat situations. Training, huh? Tank crossed his arms over his chest. I've been training dogs since before you were born, little girl. Real dogs, not some pampered military pets. I guarantee I could have your dogs eating out of my hand in 5 minutes. That's not how it works, Amy replied. These aren't regular dogs. They're specifically bred and trained for military operations. They respond only to their handlers and authorized personnel. Authorized personnel, Tank repeated, his voice mocking. You mean like tough guys who actually know how to handle animals? Not some little girl playing dress-up in an army costume? The comment stung, but Amy had heard variations of it throughout her career. She was used to people questioning her capabilities based on her size and gender, but it never got easier. What bothered her most was the complete disrespect they were showing for Max and Bella, two animals who had served their country with distinction. I'm not playing dress-up, she said firmly. I'm a commissioned officer in the United States Army, and these dogs are military assets under my responsibility. Military assets, Tank laughed. Sounds fancy, but I bet they're just regular dogs with fancy titles. Probably can't even do basic tricks without treats and belly rubs. One of the younger bikers, a thin man with multiple tattoos covering his arms, stepped forward. My cousin's got a German Shepherd that's twice as tough as any military dog. That thing will attack anyone who looks at it wrong. No special training needed. That's exactly the problem, Amy said, her professional mask slipping slightly. Untrained aggression is dangerous and unpredictable. Military dogs are taught discipline, control, and precision. They know when to act and when to wait. Discipline? Tank guffawed. Lady, dogs understand one thing, who's the alpha? And looking at you, I'm guessing these dogs figured out real quick that they're in charge. Amy felt her patience wearing thin. She glanced back at her truck, where Max and Bella waited patiently in their climate-controlled compartments. They trusted her to protect them and get them safely to their destination. She couldn't let a group of ignorant bikers derail their mission. I really need to go inside now, she said, making another attempt to move past Tank. This time he didn't just block her path. He actually reached out and lightly grabbed her arm, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop her movement. The gesture crossed a line and Amy's training kicked in immediately. Sir, I need you to remove your hand, she said, her voice taking on a different tone, one that her military colleagues would recognize as a warning, but Tank either didn't recognize the change or chose to ignore it. Relax, soldier girl. We're just having a friendly conversation. No need to get all uptight about it. Remove your hand. Now. Amy's voice was steady, but carried an unmistakable edge of authority. Instead of complying, Tank's grip tightened slightly. Or what? You'll sick your attack poodles on me? His friends laughed, but Amy noticed that some of them looked slightly uncomfortable now. The situation was escalating beyond harmless teasing, and even they could sense it. The parking lot seemed to grow quieter around them. Other customers were actively avoiding their area now, and Amy could see a few people watching nervously from inside the diner through the windows. She realized that this confrontation was exactly what Tank wanted. An audience for his dominance. "Display. Let me explain something to you," Tank said, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was an intimidating whisper. "I've been riding these roads for 20 years. I've handled dogs that would make your military mutts whimper. Big dogs, mean dogs, dogs trained to fight, and they all respected me because I showed them who was boss." Amy looked him directly in the eyes. "These aren't fighting dogs, they're highly trained military working animals. There's a difference." "The only difference," Tank said, his grip still firm on her arm, "is that mine were trained by real men who knew what they were doing. Not by some little girl who probably can't even control a goldfish." That was the final straw. Amy had maintained her composure through insults about her size, her gender, and her military service. But questioning her ability to work with Max and Bella, two dogs who had trusted her with their lives in dangerous situations overseas, was something she couldn't let slide. She looked Tank straight in the eye and spoke with quiet conviction. "You want to see what my dogs can really do? You want to test your theories about military training versus whatever amateur hour you think you're running? Fine. Let me show you exactly what these dogs are capable of." The challenge hung in the air like electricity before a storm. Tank's friends grew quiet, sensing that something had fundamentally shifted in the conversation. Amy could feel her heart beating faster, but her voice remained steady and controlled. "But when you see what they can do," she continued, "I want you to remember that you asked for this demonstration, and I want you to think about all the soldiers whose lives these dogs have saved while you were sitting here making jokes." Tank's eyes narrowed, but his ego wouldn't let him back down in front of his crew. "You're on, soldier girl. Let's see these super dogs of yours." The moment those words left Amy's mouth, she knew there was no going back. Tank's face lit up with a mixture of surprise and excitement, like a kid who had just been told he could have ice cream for dinner. His friends exchanged glances, some looking eager for the show while others seemed a bit uncertain about where this was heading. Well, Tank said, finally releasing Amy's arm. "Looks like the little soldier has some fight in her after all. Boys, we're about to get a real education in military dog training." Amy rubbed her arm where Tank had gripped it, not because it hurt but because she needed a moment to think. What had she just gotten herself into? Her orders were simple. Transport Max and Bella safely to San Diego. Getting into a confrontation with civilians wasn't part of the plan. But sometimes plans changed, and sometimes you had to adapt to unexpected situations. The bikers formed a loose circle around the area between Amy's truck and the diner entrance. Word was spreading quickly through the parking lot that something interesting was about to happen. A few truckers had come out of the diner to watch, keeping their distance but clearly curious. Even some of the diner staff had gathered near the windows. "Before we do this," Amy said, her military training kicking in, "I need to establish some ground rules." Tank laughed and looked around at his audience. "Ground rules? What is this, a boxing match? Lady, we're just looking at some dogs." "These aren't pets," Amy repeated firmly. "They're trained military assets. That means they respond to commands, they assess threats, and they act accordingly. If you do something stupid, they will react to protect themselves and their handler." "Protect themselves?" Tank's voice rose with amusement. "From what? I'm not going to hurt your precious puppies. I just want to show everyone here that dogs are dogs, military or not. They respond to strength and confidence, not fancy training certificates." Amy walked toward her truck, the crowd following at a respectful distance. She could feel dozens of eyes on her as she approached the vehicle. Through the observation windows she could see Max and Bella. Both dogs had heard the commotion outside and were alert, their ears perked up and their eyes focused on their handler. "Max has been trained in explosive detection," Amy said loud, enough for everyone to hear. "He's found over 30 improvised explosive devices in Afghanistan, saving countless lives. Bella specializes in tracking and patrol work. She's tracked enemy combatants across miles of desert terrain." "Sounds impressive," Tank said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe a word of it. "But I bet they're just regular dogs with fancy job descriptions." Probably couldn't find a tennis ball in a closet. Some of the bikers laughed, but Amy noticed that the truckers and other observers weren't joining in. They seemed to sense that something serious was about to happen. Amy placed her hand on the truck's door handle, then paused. I want everyone to understand something. Once I open this door, these dogs will be in work mode. They're not going to come out wagging their tails looking for belly rubs. They're going to assess the situation, identify potential threats, and wait for my commands. Lady, you're making this way more dramatic than it needs to be, Tank said. But Amy noticed he took a small step backward. They're dogs, not weapons of mass destruction. Actually, Amy said quietly, they kind of are weapons. Highly trained, highly disciplined weapons that know exactly when and how to use their capabilities. She looked around at the crowd that had gathered. I need everyone to stay back at least 10 feet. Don't make sudden movements, don't shout, and definitely don't try to approach the dogs without permission. Tank rolled his eyes. Come on, people. She's trying to make this into some kind of military operation. They're just dogs. But Amy could see that his bravado was starting to crack. The reality of what he had challenged her to do was beginning to sink in. He had assumed he would be dealing with regular pets, not actual military working animals. Amy opened the first compartment and Max stepped out with fluid grace. The German Shepherd's demeanor was completely different from what anyone in the crowd expected. He didn't bound out excitedly or look around for attention. Instead, he immediately positioned himself next to Amy's left side, his eyes scanning the crowd with professional intensity. The change in the atmosphere was immediate and noticeable. The casual chatter among the observers died down. Max wasn't acting like a pet. He was acting like a soldier reporting for duty. This is Max, Amy said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used during training exercises. He's 4 years old, weighs 85 pounds, and has completed over 200 successful missions. Max stood perfectly still, his ears forward and his body language alert, but controlled. His eyes moved constantly, assessing each person in the crowd, categorizing them as potential threats or non-threats. Tank tried to maintain his confident facade. Okay, so he's well trained. I'll give you that. But watch this. He took a step forward and made a clicking sound with his tongue, the kind of noise people make to call a friendly dog over. Max's reaction was immediate and striking. His head turned toward Tank, his eyes locked onto him, and his body shifted into a ready position. He didn't growl or bark, but every line of his body communicated a single message. I see you. I'm evaluating you, and I'm ready to act if necessary. Tank's clicking stopped abruptly. Why isn't he coming over here? Dogs always come when I call them. Because he's not your dog, Amy explained. He doesn't take commands from strangers. He's waiting for orders from his handler, me. Amy opened the second compartment and Bella emerged with the same professional composure as Max. She took position on Amy's right side, creating a protective formation. Now Amy stood with 2 highly trained military dogs flanking her, both animals, alert and ready for whatever might happen next. The crowd had grown larger, but it had also grown quieter. People were beginning to understand that this wasn't going to be a typical dog show. These animals radiated an intensity that made everyone instinctively keep their distance. All right, Tank said, his voice not quite as confident as before. So they're disciplined. I respect that, but let's see how they handle someone who knows what they're doing. He started to walk toward Amy and the dogs, moving with what he probably thought was authoritative confidence. But he only made it 3 steps before both Max and Bella shifted, their positions slightly, their focus intensifying on him. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Amy said calmly. Tank stopped, but his pride wouldn't let him back down completely. Why? What are they going to do, bite me? I thought military dogs were supposed to be under control. They are under control, Amy replied. But they're also trained to protect their handler. If they perceive you as a threat, they will act accordingly. A threat? Tank's voice rose. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm just trying to make friends with your dogs. You grabbed my arm against my will, Amy pointed out. You've been aggressive and hostile. From their perspective, you are a potential threat. Tank looked around at his friends. then at the growing crowd of observers. He was trapped between his ego and his growing realization that he might be in over his head. "This is ridiculous," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "They're just dogs. I've handled bigger dogs than these." "Have you handled dogs trained to detect explosives?" Amy asked. "Dogs trained to track humans across difficult terrain? Dogs trained to neutralize threats with precision and control?" Tank didn't answer immediately. The questions hung in the air as he stared at Max and Bella, both of whom remained perfectly still, perfectly alert, and perfectly ready to respond to whatever came next. "You wanted to see what they could do," Amy said. "Are you ready for that demonstration?" Tank stood frozen for a moment, staring at the two German shepherds that flanked Amy like professional bodyguards. The parking lot had grown so quiet you could hear the distant hum of air conditioners and the occasional car passing on the highway. Even the wind seemed to have stopped blowing. "Well?" Amy asked, her voice cutting through the silence. "You said you wanted to see what they could do. What would you like to see first?" Tank's mouth opened and closed a couple of times before any words came out. I mean, what can they actually do? Besides stand there looking serious?" Amy smiled. For the first time since this whole situation began. "Oh, they can do much more than just stand there." Max's attention. The change in Max was immediate and remarkable. If he had seemed alert before, now he looked like a coiled spring ready to launch. His entire body tightened, his ears stood at perfect attention, and his eyes locked onto Amy with laser focus. The transformation was so dramatic that several people in the crowd took an involuntary step backward. "Now watch this," Amy said to the crowd. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small cloth bag. To everyone watching, it looked like nothing special. Just a little canvas pouch that could have contained anything. "Max, search," Amy commanded, tossing the bag about 20 feet away into the parking lot. What happened next amazed everyone watching. Max didn't just run toward the bag like a regular dog chasing a toy. Instead, he moved with purpose and precision, his nose working constantly as he approached the target. He circled the bag once, twice, then sat down next to it and looked back at Amy. "Good boy, Max, alert." Max immediately lay down next to the bag and placed his nose directly on it, his body forming a perfect straight line. He didn't move, didn't pant, didn't look around at the crowd. He simply maintained his position like a living statue. Tank's jaw dropped. "What's in that bag?" "Training scent," Amy explained. "It simulates the smell of explosive materials. Max just showed you exactly what he would do if he detected a real bomb." He found it, marked the location, and waited for further instructions. The crowd murmured with appreciation. This wasn't a dog doing tricks for treats. This was a professional, performing a job that could mean the difference between life and death in a real situation. That's actually pretty impressive," Tank admitted reluctantly. "But tracking a bag you threw isn't exactly a real-world scenario." Amy nodded. "You're right. Max, return." Max immediately stood up and trotted back to Amy's side, resuming his protective position. Amy then reached into her truck and pulled out a small piece of cloth. "This is a scent article," she explained to the crowd. "It's been handled by one of the military personnel at our base. Bella, are you ready to work?" Bella's transformation was just as dramatic as Max's had been. Her posture straightened, her eyes focused intensely on Amy, and her entire demeanor shifted from calm alertness to professional readiness. Amy held the cloth down for Bella to smell. The dog took several deep sniffs, processing the scent information with the same seriousness a detective might examine evidence at a crime scene. "Bella, track." What happened next left the entire crowd speechless. Bella put her nose to the ground and began moving through the parking lot with incredible precision. She wasn't wandering randomly. She was following an invisible trail that only she could detect. The amazing part was that Bella was actually tracking a real scent trail. Earlier, that morning, when Amy had stopped for gas about 50 miles back, a military police officer had helped her check the vehicle. That officer had walked from the gas station to Amy's truck, and now Bella was following that exact path backward. Bella wove between parked cars, her nose never leaving the ground, her tail straight and focused. She led the crowd on a winding path through the parking lot, past several 18-wheelers, around a family's SUV, and finally to the spot where Amy had parked earlier to make a phone call. When Bella reached the end of the trail, she sat down and looked back at Amy, waiting for her next command. "Outstanding work, Bella. Return." The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause. Even Tank's friends were clapping and whistling in appreciation. What they had just witnessed went far beyond anything they had expected. "How did she do that?" asked one of the truckers who had been watching. "There must have been 100 different scents in this parking lot. Military working dogs are trained to distinguish between thousands of different scents," Amy explained. "Bella can track a specific person's scent trail even hours after they've passed through an area, even with all the other smells around." Tank was staring at Bella with something approaching respect. "I've never seen anything like that. My dogs can barely find their food bowls half the time." "There's a big difference between pet dogs and working dogs," Amy said. "These two have undergone months of intensive training. But let me show you something else." She turned to face Max. "Max, watch him." She pointed directly at Tank. Max's entire focus shifted to Tank. His eyes locked onto the biker leader and didn't waver. It wasn't an aggressive stare, but it was intensely focused, like a security guard who had been told to keep an eye on a specific person. Tank tried to move to his left. Max's head followed his movement. Tank stepped to his right. Max tracked him perfectly. Tank tried backing up. Max never lost sight of him. "This is what we call focused surveillance," Amy explained. "Max is now watching Tank specifically. He'll continue to do so until I give him a different command." That's actually kind of unnerving," Tank said, clearly uncomfortable with the intense attention. "How long will he do that?" "As long as I tell him to," Amy replied. "Hours if necessary. Military working dogs are trained for endurance as well as skill." She then demonstrated several other commands with both dogs. They showed perfect heel work, moving in formation beside Amy as she walked. They demonstrated down and stay, remaining motionless even when Tank's friends tried to distract them with whistles and calls. But the most impressive demonstration came when Amy set up an obstacle course using traffic cones from her truck. "This simulates building searches," she explained. "Both dogs are trained to clear areas and locate hidden threats." She sent Max through the course first. He moved like a professional, checking each cone systematically, his nose working constantly. When Amy had secretly placed another training scent behind one of the cones, Max found it immediately and gave his alert signal. Bella's run through the course was equally impressive. Her movements were fluid and confident, her focus never wavering from the task at hand. By the time the demonstrations were finished, the crowd had grown to nearly 50 people. Word had spread through the truck stop that something amazing was happening in the parking lot, and people had come out to see for themselves. Tank stood in stunned silence, his earlier confidence completely gone. The other bikers looked equally amazed. These weren't the pampered military pets they had expected to see. These were highly trained professionals who happened to have 4 legs and fur. "I owe you an apology," Tank said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "I had no idea. I knew military dogs existed, but I never really understood what that meant." Amy nodded, accepting his words but not yet ready to let her guard down completely. Max and Bella remained in position beside her, still alert, still ready for whatever might come next. "These dogs have saved lives," she said simply. "They've served their country with honor. They deserve respect, not mockery." Tank looked around at his friends, then back at Amy. "You're absolutely right, and so do you. I was wrong to dismiss what you do." The crowd began to disperse slowly, people heading back to their vehicles or into the diner, talking excitedly about what they had just witnessed. But Tank and his crew remained, and Amy could sense that this confrontation was finally coming to an end. The question now was how it would end. The silence in the parking lot stretched for what felt like minutes, though it was probably only seconds. Tank stood there looking at Max and Bella, then at Amy, then back at the dogs. His whole expression had changed from the cocky biker who had first approached her. The swagger was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine amazement mixed with a healthy dose of humility. "I need to say something," Tank announced, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "And I need everyone here to hear it." He turned to face the crowd that was still gathered around them. Some people had started to walk away, but they stopped when they heard him speak. Others pulled out their phones, sensing that something important was about to happen. "20 minutes ago, I made a complete fool of myself," Tank said, his voice steady but clearly emotional. "I saw this young woman in uniform and I made assumptions. Wrong assumptions. I thought I knew what I was talking about when it came to dogs. I thought military training was just fancy words for basic tricks." He paused and looked directly at Amy. "I was wrong. Completely, totally wrong." Amy remained standing with Max and Bella at her sides, watching Tank carefully. She had been in situations like this before where people's attitudes shifted after seeing what military working dogs could really do. But something about Tank's tone suggested this was more than just impressed admiration. "These aren't just dogs," Tank continued, gesturing toward Max and Bella. "These are heroes, real heroes who've served our country and saved lives. And this woman right here is their partner, their handler, their teammate. She's not just some soldier playing with pets. She's a professional who's responsible for two of the most impressive animals I've ever seen." The crowd murmured agreement. Several people nodded, and Amy could see phones still recording as Tank continued his speech. "I want to tell you all something," Tank said, his voice growing stronger. "My name is Frank Morrison. I'm a veteran myself. Army, served 2 tours in Iraq back in the early 2000s. I should have known better. I should have recognized a fellow soldier and shown proper respect." Amy's eyebrows rose slightly. She hadn't expected that revelation. Tank, Frank, being a veteran, explained some of his confidence around military topics, but it also made his earlier behavior more puzzling. Frank continued, "When I was overseas, we had dogs working with us sometimes, but I never really understood what went into their training. I never saw demonstrations like what we just witnessed. I thought they were just regular dogs doing a job." He walked closer to Amy, moving slowly and keeping his hands visible. Max and Bella tracked his movement but didn't show any signs of aggression. They seemed to sense that the threat level had dropped significantly. "Ma'am," Frank said formally, "I owe you and your dogs a sincere apology. I disrespected you, I disrespected them, and I disrespected the uniform you wear. That was unacceptable behavior from someone who should know better." Amy studied his face for a moment. She had learned to read people during her military service, and Frank's apology seemed genuine. The arrogance was gone, replaced by what looked like actual remorse. "Apology accepted," she said simply, "and thank you for your service." Frank nodded gratefully, then surprised everyone by reaching into his wallet. He pulled out a business card and handed it to Amy. "I own a motorcycle repair shop about 50 miles from here," he explained. "But more importantly, I'm part of a veteran support group that helps military families. We do fundraising, we help with medical expenses, we support programs for veterans who are struggling." Amy took the card and looked at it. Morrison's Custom Cycles was printed in bold letters, along with a phone number and address. "I want to make this right," Frank continued. "Not just the apology, but something more meaningful. Our group has been looking for a worthy cause to support. Would you be willing to tell us more about military working dog programs? Maybe we could organize some fundraising to help support these incredible animals and their handlers." This was definitely not the direction Amy had expected this encounter to go. That's very generous," she said. "There are always needs for equipment, medical care, training facilities. Military working dogs save lives, but the programs are often underfunded." Frank's friends had been standing quietly during his speech, but now they started stepping forward. The biker with the shaved head extended his hand to Amy. "Name's Rick," he said. "I want to apologize too. We all acted like jerks, and these dogs are amazing. Frank's right. We should do something to help." One by one, the other bikers introduced themselves and offered their own apologies. Amy was surprised to learn that 3 of them were also veterans and 2 others had family members who had served in the military. You know what really gets me? Said the biker with the bandana, who introduced himself as Dave. My nephew is overseas right now. If dogs like these are keeping him safe, then I owe them more respect than I can ever give. The crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation was now witnessing something completely different. A genuine moment of connection and understanding between people who had started as adversaries. An older trucker approached the group. I've been driving these roads for 30 years, he said, and I've never seen anything like what these dogs just did. That tracking demonstration was incredible. How do they even learn to do that? Amy found herself answering questions about military working dog training, their deployment overseas, and the bond between handlers and their canine partners. Max and Bella, still alert but relaxed, seemed to enjoy the positive attention they were now receiving. The most important thing people need to understand, Amy explained to the growing group, is that these dogs aren't weapons or tools. They're partners, they're teammates. Max and Bella trust me with their lives, and I trust them with mine. Frank nodded thoughtfully. That's what I missed before. I was thinking about dominance and control, but what you have with them is partnership. Exactly, Amy said. They don't obey me because they're afraid of me or because I'm stronger than them. They work with me because we're a team. We've trained together, we trust each other, and we have a job to do. A young woman who had been watching from near the diner approached hesitantly. Excuse me, she said to Amy. I'm a college student studying veterinary medicine. Would it be possible to ask you some questions about working with military dogs? This is fascinating. Before Amy knew it, she was surrounded by people asking genuine, respectful questions about military working dogs, their training, their deployment, and their care. The atmosphere had completely transformed from confrontation to education. Frank stood nearby, watching the interactions with a satisfied expression. You know, he said to Rick, this is exactly the kind of thing our veterans group should be supporting. Real heroes doing real work. Amy glanced at her watch and realized she had been in the parking lot for over an hour. She needed to get back on the road to make her delivery deadline, but she was amazed by how the situation had turned out. I hate to break this up, she announced, but I need to get Max and Bella back on the road. We still have several hours of driving ahead of us. Frank stepped forward again. Before you go, I want to give you something. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal pin, a veteran's service pin with an American flag design. This belonged to my unit, he said. I want you to have it as a thank you for what you and your dogs do and as an apology for how I acted today. Amy accepted the pin, genuinely touched by the gesture. Thank you, Frank, this means a lot. As she prepared to load Max and Bella back into their transport compartments, Frank made one final request. Would you mind if I took a picture with you and the dogs? Not for social media or anything like that, just for our veterans group. We meet next week and I want to tell them about what I learned today. Amy agreed, and soon several people were taking photos. Respectful pictures that showed the professionalism and dignity of military working dogs, rather than treating them like curiosities. As Amy drove away from the truck stop, she looked in her rearview mirror and saw Frank and his crew still standing in the parking lot talking animatedly among themselves. In the back of her truck, Max and Bella had settled back into their travel positions, the excitement of the demonstration behind them. Amy smiled as she merged back onto the highway. Sometimes the best education happened in the most unexpected places, and sometimes the biggest skeptics became the strongest supporters. Today had been a good day for military working dogs, and for the people who serve alongside them.